Hello and welcome. I hope you can all hear me well. My name is Susanna Zamataro. I'm Director General at the International Road Federation and greeting you from Geneva, Switzerland, where we are based. It's a bit of a rainy day here, but I'm delighted to have the chance to welcome today Isabel Dedring and all of you to this new episode of the IRF Executive Talks. This is a series of 30-minute talks that we are hosting together with senior executives. And I'd like, before we'll welcome formally Isabel, I'd like to give you a couple of housekeeping rules for the next 30 minutes. The meeting is being recorded, and so all of you will be able to watch this IRF executive talk later on as well on our website, and you will all be notified as well when the video recording is available, probably by tomorrow. We will be spending roughly 20 minutes with Isabel engaging in a one-to-one conversation, and we have reserved the last part of our talk, roughly 10 minutes at the end, for a question and answers. So get your questions ready. You can already put them forward by using the question and answer function that you should be able to see it at the bottom of your screen. Use the chat function as well if you want to share some information, if you want to comment. But for questions, please make sure you have short questions and put them in the question and answer section. The team is here to help us also go through the questions, and I'd like to thank Agostina and Melin also from my team joining us today. But without further ado, please allow me to welcome properly to the stage Isabel Dedring. She's the Global Transport Lead at ARUP. Isabel, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
You're most welcome. It's our pleasure. I'm not sure I can make justice to your impressive career, but let me try to say a few words on your parkour so far. Isabel has been ARUP's global transport leader since 2016 and a member of the group board since 2019. Prior to ARUP, she was Deputy Mayor for Transport and Deputy Chair of the Transport for London Board. And in London government, her major transport projects, including creating and delivering a 1 billion cycling program and a 4 billion progressive road investment program, and leading on major transport construction projects, such as extensions to the underground and devolution of rail services. She also instigated and led on the London Infrastructure Plan 2050. Isabel is a native New Yorker and a qualified lawyer and a fellow of the Institute of Civil Engineering. Isabel, welcome, and again, thank you so much for making the time for this chat today.
Yeah, great to be here.
Isabel, time is limited and I have tons of questions to ask you. And let me start by probably talking about ARUP. ARUP has been a member of the International Road Federations for many years. And the word that I can immediately associate to ARUP is really the word sustainability. The two rhyme for me. Why is sustainability so central in your work, and how does that impact the way you do business and the way you handle operations?
Well, in fact, the values that ARUP has is the reason that I decided to join ARUP. For those of you who don't know ARUP, it's an independent engineering firm. And when it was founded 70 years ago, the founder had the idea of total architecture, which is all about being integrated across the disciplines. And I think that value has transmitted itself, decades later to all the work that we do. A lot of people don't know that actually ARUP is a not-for-profit trust. So it's founded as a trust entity, not as a, kind of typical commercial organization. And because of that, we have the opportunity to serve our members, our colleagues, 16,000 of us around the world, and to think longer term than maybe some of the other players in the space. And that all of that together allows you to really focus on sustainability, because you can think in an integrated way, you can think about the future, you can think long term. And actually, recently we have decided that all of our work must have sustainability at the heart of it, and that's driving some really big changes, even further changes within the business about what kind of work we will and won't do, but also how we do the work that we do and how we talk to our partners and our clients. We kind of always try and say, now, what if we tried this way, or could we look at it this way, and continue to try and evolve the market in the right direction. And we're very proud to be the COP26 sustainable consultant partner. So there's lots of ways in which we're trying to do that, but I think it all comes from our kind of founders' values, and the way we're structured actually really flows through a lot of what we do.
Thank you. Thank you, Isabel. I know you mentioned COP26, and of course, decarbonization is the other big word that comes and is associated very high in the agenda right now, especially in the lead up to COP26 negotiations. How do we accelerate decarbonization of road transport? And since you have such a broad experience, is there something that the road sector can actually learn from other sectors?
So first of all, this is one of my favorite subjects, because I think transport has been this sort of, bad guy for too long, right? So, ever since probably the 1970s, there was a big push into cars and roads with the rise of the middle class in a lot of countries around the world. And that's still continuing. And so there's sort of this idea that, in tackling climate change and in delivering a zero carbon world, that transport's, kind of the bad guy, and we have to drag ourselves along to get to the right place. I mean, in fact, in many ways that has been true. Obviously transport's been a big source of pollution, of severance, of road safety issues, the list goes on. But what I'm seeing over the last couple of years, and I'm sure colleagues on the call will be seeing that too, the pace of change in the transport sector now is so dramatic and so rapid. So this idea of transport as the laggard and the slow kid that's dragging along, actually, if you look at the building stock turns over much more slowly than the vehicle stock. And the rate at which the building stock, which is the primary source of carbon emissions in the world, the rate at which buildings are being retrofitted, decarbonized, is much slower than the rate at which we are now decarbonizing transport. So there's a really exciting opportunity for transport to not only not be the slow one, but to actually be in the forefront on this agenda, especially in newer markets that are still opening. You don't have to go through diesel buses. You can skip straight to electric buses. So there's an opportunity to leapfrog, especially in developing parts of the world, rapidly growing cities. There's an opportunity to leapfrog straight into the forefront. So I actually think transport is really well positioned to be almost on the leading edge of this. So you're asking, how do we do that? For me, the main priority is to deploy existing technologies that we already have. We have a little bit of an obsession in this field, not just in transport, with the latest, newest, greatest thing, flying cars, or maybe there's some even better version of energy beyond hydrogen. Actually, we have hybrid vehicle technologies, electric vehicle technologies. Increasingly, the cost of all of these technologies is coming down very, very rapidly. And the robustness of the technology is improving every month, every year. So the main focus for me, for our whole industry, should be actually rolling out at large scale the technologies we already have. Of course, in parallel, we need to be continuing to explore new technologies. So we're involved in looking at hydrogen trains, for example. There's all sorts of new things that we can be doing at the same time, but it's actually about driving, existing technologies into the industry. And one of the key parts of that, I think, for the road network is to remember that, roads doesn't equal cars as well, right? So first of all, to the extent that roads have cars on them, when cars are producing no tailpipe emissions, that's actually better per kilometer than the railway network, for example. But there's a lot of other movement that happens on the road network too. And in the public debate, there's often this idea that roads are equated to cars. Actually, you mentioned my background in London. In London, 80% of the public space in the city is the road network. And 80% of the movement on that road network is not cars. It's bus, passengers, cycling, walking, freight movement, etc. So we can decouple the idea that roads must mean polluting vehicles, and we can say roads actually can be an enabler to decarbonization. And that's a very important nuance that I think as an industry, we're not successfully quite getting out there yet. And we need to be telling our story in maybe a more positive way and kind of believing in ourselves a little bit more as an engine of decarbonization, not as the problem in the room.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's this whole debate now, in a way, thanks God, I would say, that, you know, talking about transport and roads by putting people at the center, back at the center again. So it's really talking about how do we deliver multimodal journeys to people, which is strictly associated to the debate and the discussion around decarbonization. It's about the idea of delivering values to the community, of course. Value to the community, not just those living in cities. We saw that COVID has actually opened up the eyes on a number of things that probably we were not paying too much attention before, and has brought to the front quite a number of issues. At the same time, I wonder, for the type of sector that we are, to which extent it's really our sector really ready right now to embrace this change, and even more so, how do we steer now investments in that direction? There's a lot of talking about building back better or building back forward, a lot of talking around stimulus packages, but how do we make, now that we are a little bit more aware of all these dynamics, and, you know, on the way forward, how now do we steer the sector towards that direction?
I mean, I think to a certain extent, you know, it will happen anyway, because that's where politics is going. And having worked in a political environment, but not as a politician for a long time, I always try and say to people in the industry, you know, we shouldn't try to take politics out of infrastructure. Almost all infrastructure is political. And the more that we can embrace that as an industry and use politics as a tool to drive more infrastructure, high quality infrastructure, the better. So politics is driving us towards thinking about left behind communities, left behind, you know, groups of individuals. And so transport will sort of be forced down that road anyway, whether it wants to or not. This is an area that I think for transport across the board, not just roads, has not been an area of focus for many, many decades. There's been this assumption that if you build transport infrastructure, that must be a good thing because it's connecting people, but not always, because it can displace people. So if we have transport lifts property values, and that can cause, you know, the existing community to move out and new middle-class communities to move in, that isn't always a good thing from a community perspective. And so what's great is that in the last couple of years, as you say, partly accelerated by COVID, there's been a renewed emphasis on that. And suddenly this is sort of, you know, eyes open within the infrastructure industry about how do we tackle that. I think there's a really exciting opportunity for the roads community to help on that front specifically. So these black spots within cities, for example, where people don't have access to public transport very easily, maybe because it's a low density area or a poor area, and they also don't have a car. So where is the opportunity of the road network and sharing new mobility solutions to help to provide for those sorts of communities? It's actually the roads network, and mobility on the road network is sort of uniquely positioned to help to tackle some of those black spots from a social equity standpoint. In cities and you know, wider sort of city regions in particular, but also in rural communities where rail's not appropriate, air isn't appropriate, motorways aren't appropriate, but actually the road network and bringing mobility to poor communities is actually only the road system is going to be able to do that. So that's really exciting kind of new avenue, I think, for us in the roads industry.
Absolutely. And we are trying basically to combine different needs, right? It's a need for decarbonization, there's need to provide access, as you said, to everybody access to all. So if we look at it from a perspective of business model, what are the promising business models, especially when it comes to the road sector? There's a lot of talking about road user charging scheme and mobility pricing. Actually, like I'm speaking out of Switzerland, where this country actually on the table a proposal for an innovative, I would say, mobility pricing scheme in the country.
I think there's been a real fear within the industry of talking about road pricing. It's seen as politically unacceptable. So I was closely involved in the introduction of congestion charging in London many years ago. And I was also very involved in the low emission zone that's in the center of the city and various changes to who was eligible and who wasn't. And so I've sort of lived through a lot of that politics. And what I would say is that it's all about how you position it. So we shouldn't be afraid of the politics of mobility pricing. It is absolutely inevitable that we will end up in a world of mobility pricing, which includes the road network. It's just a question of time. It's whether it's going to be in 10 years or 50 years or 1 year. And that will happen all across, the entire network all across the world. Not least because what we currently do is pay for the road network, as you all know, based largely on fuel tax and those sorts of techniques. The less fuel we use, the less tax we raise. It doesn't work anymore as a revenue raising model. So we need a new revenue model, whether we like it or not. And mobility pricing makes a lot more sense. So I think we need to be confident enough to reframe with the public what it is that we're talking about here. And one of the ways in which we can make it palatable is by creating incentives within the system, right? So, if you buy a green vehicle, this happens, or if you don't have any choices, that happens. The relative price between vehicular movement versus public transport. Can you pay people to walk and cycle? Now we can because of big data. So how do we integrate that to build something that's politically really appealing, not only politically not scary? And I think that's really doable. The other area where there's huge change coming is the urban transit business model. A lot of change already happening before COVID to the commute, which has been the backbone of the revenue model for cities. Yes, the commute will come back post-COVID, but it won't come back quite in the same way. And you only need to lose 5 or 10% of your commuting revenue to make a huge impact on your overall business model as a city. So all around the world, we're seeing cities and doing work with cities to understand how do they reframe their business models? Does that mean making more money from property, oversight development? Does it mean pricing some of the new mobility providers who use the road for free? Whether that's Uber or e-scooters or whoever it might be, they aren't paying in the same way that the public sector is paying for running the bus network. So, there's a lot of change that's happening there. And again, there's a lot of opportunity also for all the players in the industry to sort of try and influence that. But it is inevitable that the urban transit business model will change as well, and that will affect players in the road industry.
Thank you, Isabel. And that connects as well to this issue of innovation, data, and new technologies that you were referring to right before in our talking. And I have to say, our sector has been a little bit slow compared to other sectors in embracing innovation, not in the terms of pure technology per se, because there's a lot of technology in what we do, especially in the road business, but embracing innovation when it comes to thinking and innovating processes. So that change will be a real game changer for the industry. Are you already seeing in the type of projects you're working on that type of shift, this attention to data and the support of technologies and new tools, but also to change processes and the way we approach things?
And there's a huge, everybody you talk to wants to use all the data that's now available, right? But most people that we work with are just saying, gosh, where do we start? And then become overwhelmed by the volume of data let alone structuring it into any kind of process that you're describing, which is making it useful. I think there's a bit of a overexcitement about the volume of data that's theoretically available. Much of it you can't access. The data that you can access isn't very clean or usable. And then how do you put it all together so it can talk to each other is still a huge challenge. And there are no easy solutions out there. The opportunity that there is when we can start to put a few of the right data sets together, which we're able to now more and more with our clients that can kind of structure the data in the right way. When they collect it, they think about, we want to try and put these data sets together. So let's make sure we collect it in the right way and get the rights to use it from people for privacy reasons, et cetera. And how do we put that all together? And then we're able to start to understand how people move around the network in a totally new way that we haven't been able to understand before. So we're doing agent-based models in a number of parts of the world for a few different countries and cities. And so what that means is that we're building up the transport model of how people want to move based on individuals and what they're actually doing. Before, for any transport modelers on the call, you'll know this, we take very aggregated, high level, well, we think this whole part of the city probably is roughly doing this, which doesn't really give you very accurate data at all. And therefore, the quality of the infrastructure that we can design is much lower than what it should be. So we have this opportunity to design infrastructure that really is responding to how people are moving around the network. But first we have to get the data collection and the structure right. But the opportunity is amazing if we can get it right. Not to mention modes like walking and cycling, where we can't design properly for pedestrians and cyclists, because for data collection, they're invisible most of the time. It's like they don't exist. Now, because of mobile phones, we can start to think about how we can understand what's going on the network, not just cars, not just lorries, not just buses. So that's a really exciting kind of part of this opportunity too. But we're just in the very foothills of the whole thing. Yeah. But a lot of industries are too. We're about 20 years behind banking and supermarkets, but we're probably 20 years ahead of a few other people. So it's okay.
Isabel, I have to make a pause here because actually the time is just flying. We are left with 5 minutes and maybe 2 minutes more if people are willing to stay with us. And I want to greet everyone. We really have people apparently from all around the world, including Latin America, watching us. There are a couple of questions flying in, and let me try and see if I can get this correctly. There is a question about, do you think that private means of transport will spike up in numbers versus public transport, for example? That's one question. And then there's another one, well, which is linked to this issue we were talking about, rethinking infrastructure and spaces. And maybe you can take the two together, really redefining spaces, repurposing infrastructure, reusing materials as well. Is this side all idea at the center of the concept of circular economy? And so the question is, how is the sector advancing on this front? And I know ARUP in particular is doing great work on this whole concept of I think what you call the Lego blocks, different way of thinking and designing and planning infrastructure that will give us this flexibility going forward.
Yeah, well, that's only a few small questions there. I mean, just in terms of sort of this whole question of permanence, when we talk about the last few years, especially, people feel, there's so much uncertainty about the future. So then, because it's human nature, we want to try and have certainty about the future. So the more uncertain, the more we try and pin down the future. Forget it. We don't know what is going to happen in the future. But what we need to do is design for uncertainty, because as an industry, we always design for certainty with like, oh, I'm going to build this road and I'm planning for it to be there for 200 years. Look at the Roman roads in Britain where I am, they're still there and they were built thousands of years ago now. So it's getting ourselves as an industry comfortable with the idea of designing in a modular way that can evolve over time in engagement with how our users are changing over time, rather than as a fixed thing like a rock. And that is a huge cultural shift for the industry, for people within the industry who've designed things, they love permanence. And I think it's a great opportunity for our younger colleagues who don't have that kind of culture of the industry coming in to really refresh the industry and give us a new approach to flexibility, modularity, and it links to materials use and the circular economy. We should be designing for the life that this thing will likely have, what it should have, different components designed for different life cycles, rather than everything designed for 200 years, which is usually what we like to do in the transport industry. So I think there's an exciting, huge opportunity for people in materials who are interested in the environment, who are bringing new digital skill sets. I mean, we're doing things like offsite construction of bridges, 3D printed bridges that are all completely modular. We can deconstruct them, reconstruct them. So it's very exciting. So I think we have to let go of one culture in the industry, but then embrace a new culture. So it's kind of going towards the new culture rather than being sad about letting go of the old culture. And I think as part of that big change is this blurring of the boundaries between public and private you talked about. If I think about how we thought about things in City Hall even 10 years ago in my old job, we have the buses and the trains and they're run by the state. And then we have cars and they're owned by individuals. We don't like blur the boundaries at all. Now you have e-scooters that people use, but they're owned, but you share them. This zone in the middle that is like privately operated, publicly maybe facilitated. And so I think that whole idea is blurring and having a much more all-embracing idea about what is transport and how do we harness these new technologies? How do we channel the new mobility providers rather than us versus them is going to be the way forward. And we need people in the industry who can kind of help to do that and bring the two parties together in a much more fluid way.
Thank you so much, Isabel. I don't know how the time went actually. This is so interesting. Our time is already over, but I just want to let the audience know that we'll be summarizing a little bit as well this conversation, so they will be able to read about it as well in our next newsletter. But a lot of these topics Isabel has been kindly sharing with us today will be subject and presented at the IRF annual conference, which is taking place on 20 and 21st of October. It's going to be a fully digital event, free of charge. We just want to make sure we give everybody the opportunity to come and share ideas. So make sure you register. You will find that information on our website. And join us, because you will have the opportunity to hear a lot about these things as well. I just want to abuse 1 minute more your time, Isabel, and ask you, because IRF really places a lot of attention to young generations. We do have an IRF Young Professional program. And by the way, they will be hosting their summit at the end of this month on 29 or 30th of September. Information on our website as well. I just want to ask you, Isabel, if you were to give an advice to the young generations out there, especially women as well, because you know that our industry is quite male-dominated type of business. What would that be on how to thrive forward in their career?
Oh gosh, well, I mean, first of all, the transport industry, I always say the smallest possible time unit in transport is 10 years. So, we're just a little bit slow moving. I think that's changing now. But you have to have tenacity. You have to stick to what it is that you want to do, and things will change if you pursue it relentlessly and really stay stay with it. That's one thing. Second thing is anybody can influence the direction of this industry. Sometimes I meet younger people who think, you know, that's for the chief executive to decide. I'm like, no, anyone, be proactive. If you have an idea, you want to change something, reach out and, you know, pursue it, but don't all over the place, you know, like pursue that thing and you will be successful. In the end, I can tell you some of the things I've done took at least 10 years to get to happen, but they did happen in the end. And finally, I would just say, you know, actually being an outsider can be an advantage. So if you're younger, if you're female, if you're from another country, yes, you're outside maybe the old boys club, if there is one where you're working. But being the outsider means sometimes you can say things other people won't say. You can say things in a way that people will hear, which they might not hear from one of their old pals. And so being female, being American, working in Britain for over 20 years, for me, I've felt that's been an advantage more than a disadvantage to be female, to be younger, and to be from another country. And I've sometimes used it to my advantage to get to the ends that I wanted to get to. So that's a message of hope from the outsider community, I think.
It's a nice perspective and a nice new way of looking at things. Our time is up, Isabel. Thank you so much for making time for this conversation today. And thanks to everyone, to all the participants who have joined us today. As mentioned, recordings will be soon available on our website, probably by tomorrow already. So stay tuned. We'll skip the next IRF Executive Talk in October because we have our conference, but stay tuned and a new episode will come up in November. Thank you and have a great afternoon for those in Europe, or good night for the Australians, and good morning to people in the US. Thank you, Isabel.
Thank you very much, Susanna. Great to see you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.